General Grievous. You're shorter than I expected.
Jedi scum!
Skyrim's lore doesn't make any sense, its gold doesn't make any sense, and now I'm telling you that these big old rock formations don't make any sense. If you've seen my videos before, it's probably the least surprising thing you've heard from me, but there's a reason why I'm making such bold claims here. For such a mountainous region in Tamriel, the peaks we see in Skyrim, the game, seem a little short. Now this is obviously because the mountains aren't to scale, something we'll discuss later, but that isn't the only problem. Even in lore, the mountains, or I guess this mountain specifically, seem way too small in Skyrim if we compare them to what we see in the real world. Mount Everest, this is not. So let's take a closer look at the mountains of Skyrim, specifically the tallest it has on offer, the Throat of the World, and break down why it seems so small and then calculate how big it should be with some good old maths. And yes, I'm English, it's maths here, short for mathematics, it's plural, okay? It's bloody plural. Also, for some measurements, I'll state them in the units I'm most familiar with as a Brit, but for you US folk, Matilda here will give you the conversions and freedom units. But enough faffing about, let's have a deep dive into Skyrim's mountains.
This is the most sacred mountain in Skyrim, Jorrvaskr, the great mountain of the world.
So, to start talking about the in-game iteration, it's important to understand the Throat of the World status. You may also know it as the home of High Hrothgar, named after the mountainous region of Hrothgar, which is where the 7,000 steps end. A way of thinking about it is that Hrothgar is like the Himalayas and the Throat of the World is its tallest peak, like Everest, but the comparison to this mountain and Everest will have to stop here. You see, the Throat of the World isn't the tallest mountain on Nirn, the world in which the Elder Scrolls takes place. At least that we know of anyway, but it is the tallest mountain in Tamriel. Whether there's a taller mountain on another continent is unknown, which we'll go over later, but this tallest peak in Tamriel status is actually a relatively new one. Before Skyrim the game, the Red Mountain was the tallest mountain on the continent, and this didn't get retconned between Oblivion and Skyrim. The Throat of the World didn't simply grow, but instead the Red Mountain effectively blew up, erupting as a volcano, which was part of the Red Year, about 5 years after Oblivion and 196 years before Skyrim, in Year 5 of the 4th Era. During the Red Year, Morrowind became a hellscape and the Dunmer had the worst time possible. So even if the Throat of the World is the tallest mountain in the world, something sort of impossible to prove because we don't really leave Tamriel as a continent, it's more like K2 on the border of Pakistan and China than it is Mount Everest, because in the world of the Elder Scrolls, the Mount Everest equivalent blew up. But K2 is still absolutely massive. So let's then look at the size of the mountain we get in-game. Now, I'm a little dull at times, but obviously even I know that the mountains in Skyrim are not to scale. Todd did joke in an interview that he would count all of the stairs leading up to High Hrothgar to make sure that there were 7,000 steps. Well, I hope this was a joke, because otherwise Todd really can't count, and I'll leave a link to the interview in the description if you're interested. But how many steps are there actually? Well, it depends on the source we're looking at. In terms of visible steps, the unofficial Elder Scrolls pages count 732, although the Creation Kit states that there are 1,828 step objects. Now, we can't see most of them, so we're going to ignore them. This means that one step in-game roughly represents 10 in lore, or if we're going to be a bit more precise, one step in-game equals 9.5 lore steps, with some rough rounding. The Creation Kit, being the source hard carrying this video, also states that the Throat of the World is only 766.5 meters above sea level, making it its elevation. Now I want you to remember above sea level as elevation because it's not quite the same as from base to tip, which is prominence. Now for context, the Burj Khalifa is 830 meters tall, and while this is the tallest building in the world, it doesn't hold a candle to even the tallest mountain in the UK, which isn't really known for having the tallest mountains, Ben Nevis. And yes, we gave the mountain a full name and a surname. We're formal like that, I guess, but Ben here stands at 1,345 meters, significantly towering over both the Throat of the World and the Burj Khalifa. Still, remember the scaling from before, and if we are to take the multiplier we made from the steps, 9.56, we can use this multiplier on the in-game elevation on the Throat of the World to get an in-law measurement. So my estimate for the Throat of the World, in law, is a mighty elevation of 7,327.74 meters. This starts to make sense when you consider that Mount Everest has an elevation of 8,849 meters and K2 is 8,611 meters. The tallest mountain in Europe is Mount Elbrus in Russia, which, given the size of Russia, doesn't really narrow the location down. And is Russia even in Europe? Anyway, it's here, the location's here. And this mountain is 5,642 meters tall from sea level, significantly shorter than my estimation for the Throat of the World. So this makes some sense. If the Throat of the World is number one in the world, it's still shorter than a lot of mountains. And for some further context, this will put the Throat of the World 78th on the tallest mountain scale if we were to plop it in the real world. Actually, giving it a ranking of 78 makes it sound pretty unremarkable. But that's also assuming this scaling multiplier of mine actually makes sense, and when you give it a closer look, I don't really feel like it does. 7,000 steps aren't a whole lot.
You are bold, Wundunik. You dare enter a Dova's home without permission.
Now obviously I know that the 7,000 steps only takes you partway up the mountain, to High Hrothgar, and it's probably, 3/4 of the way up the Throat of the World? But 7,000 steps doesn't really seem that difficult. On flat-ish ground, you can probably do 7,000 steps in about an hour. But obviously, if you're doing a hike, you're not on flat ground. You're going up a mountain, currently the tallest in Tamriel, and 7,000 steps should not take you up this far up this mountain. Let's look at some real mountains and their step counts for context, although do be aware that most of these don't have stairs. Ben Nevis, who's making a return to this video, has an elevation of 1,345 meters and will take you from 30 to 34,000 steps depending on how long your legs are, I guess. Its prominence is the same as well, somehow, meaning that these 30 to 34,000 steps will take you up the full 1,345 meters. Even if we take a 3/4 value, that still puts Ben Nevis's hypothetical High Hrothgar location at around 25,500 steps, roughly 3 times that, the 7,000 steps up High Hrothgar, and this is a pretty squat mountain. Still, Mount Ben here doesn't have stairs, as I've said before, just a mountain path you can waddle up. So let's look at a mountain that's actually comparable to the Throat of the World in some ways because of the stairs, and is the reason I'm making this video. Mount Inari. Mount Inari is in the land of the rising sun, and convenience stores so good it makes the local Tesco Express as depressing as Liverpool's season. Japan, specifically Kyoto. This mountain famously contains a shrine with a truly ridiculous number of red gates and practically as many steps. While it only stands 233 meters tall, there are 12,000 steps. Granted, these steps go up and down more than the High Hrothgar steps do, although there is a bit of up and down here and there on the 7,000 steps, and that flat bit with that demonic frost troll. Anyway, I have actually done this hike up the Fushimi Inari Taisha path. That's the name of the shrine, and it's a pretty chill climb. 12,000 steps really weren't that bad, and I guess the relatively mild weather helped, so 7,000 steps aren't really that tough an ordeal to High Hrothgar, theoretically. Sure, it's cold, snowy, and there's a damnable frost troll ready to send you right back to your last save, but 7,000 steps is easily a day's climb. Now that brings up another question. How many steps should there be to High Hrothgar if 7,000 isn't really that tough to get up? Well, we can look at two examples. For one, let's take my rough estimate of 7,327.74 meters for the Throat of the World and compare it to a mountain practically the same height in the real world, Jomolhari, aka Chomolhari, found in Tibet, which stands at 7,326 meters above sea level, less than 2 meters behind my estimate. Based on its elevation, Jomolhari is the 78th tallest mountain in the world, and the hike takes 12 days. Now, its prominence is only 2,077 meters, and this means it's considered a pretty moderate hike. And while I couldn't find how many steps it takes exactly, the path is around 63.7 kilometers, which is probably 80 to 90,000 steps. Granted, because the path to High Hrothgar doesn't go all the way to the peak of the Throat of the World, and is probably a fair bit steeper due to using actual stairs, you could probably halve this 80 to 90,000 step value to 40 to 45,000 steps, and I feel it would work better than the 7,000 steps we have in game, provided my 7,327.74 meter elevation estimate holds up. 7,000 steps just doesn't seem like it's anywhere near enough unless these steps are super steep and only go straight up and down, or if High Hrothgar's not actually that high up the mountain. But as we know, there are straight sections along the path here and there, and these stairs don't really seem all that steep. Now, also granted that the 7,000 steps to High Hrothgar are actually the stair steps, not the physical steps of putting one foot in front of the other, which is why I halved the steps value from Jomolhari. But even if you think my value of the number of steps that should be here is too generous, you could even halve that and it would still be significantly above 7,000. Another way of looking at it is that if we assume that High Hrothgar is roughly 3/4 of the way up, thus giving it an elevation of around 5,500 meters, and we assume that each of the steps only go up, that means that each step would have to be 0.785 meters tall. For visual context, steeper than this. And, well, this is not what the stairs look like in Skyrim. Another method to work out how many steps the Throat of the World should have is to look at how tall steps from stairs are and do some maths from there. Here in the mighty land of crumpets, tea and inventing sports that everyone else is better at, stair steps are 150mm to 170mm. Because there's some up and down, straight bits, and because the stairs we see represented in-game don't look at all that steep, I'm going to assume that the average step in High Hrothgar is on the lower end, the 150mm value. So if we take my 7,327.74 meter value and divide it by the stair height, being 0.15 meters, we get 48,852 steps, rounded to the nearest step. Now that's from sea level to the very peak of the Throat of the World, so you can probably cut this down to 35,000 to 40,000 steps from the start of Ivarstead to High Hrothgar, which isn't all that far off the estimate I had from using Jomolhari. Also note that Ivarstead is pretty high above sea level, at least I think it is, so my estimate for the elevation of the Throat of the World is probably a lot lower than its actual prominence. Now, you could be lazy and just say that my sums suggest there should be around 40,000 steps to High Hrothgar, since that's where these ranges overlap, but I'm using very broad ranges and estimates. Getting exact values isn't really the goal here though. It's more to illustrate that Bethesda haven't quite got the right scale for its mountains. It's a similar story to the gold in Skyrim, something I have a video of here. And of course, I'm not necessarily saying that the scaling issue actually affects you in game. At the end of the day, Skyrim is a game, but still, if we have that rough 1 to 10 scale, and the throat of the world is actually respectfully high, there aren't enough stairs. But what if we go the other way around? What if we take the 7,000 steps to High Hrothgar and calculate how tall the mountain should be based on that?
This is High Hrothgar, our temple, sanctuary, and home. We ask that you respect our solitude while you're here.
So, if we once again take the average step height for stairs in the UK, between 150 and 170 millimeters, and go with the lower end, assuming these steps average out to 150 millimeters, for the reasons mentioned in the previous section, we have some measurements to start with. If there are really meant to be 7,000 steps, then that means the path to High Hrothgar from the base of the mountain, starting at Ivarstead, is 1,050 meters. Note that this estimate is different from measuring High Hrothgar's elevation, since we can assume that Ivarstead is significantly above sea level. Even if we double this 1,050 meter value to take both this and the extra distance from High Hrothgar to the peak, where our boy Party Snacks is chilling, then the throat of the world would only be 2,050 meters tall. This would then make the throat of the world taller than any mountain you would find in the UK based on its elevation, with Ben Nevis well short of the 2,050 meter tall sum. But this doesn't exactly scream tallest mountain in the continent. As I said before, the British Isles don't exactly have very tall mountains. Okay, now technically the throat of the world is historically the second tallest, and only has the title of the tallest because of the hell the Red Mountain put the Dunmer through, but either way, the throat of the world isn't exactly wowing me with its height with this estimate. It's more like the knee of the world. Another comparison would be looking at the tallest mountain in Scandinavia, the area that Skyrim as a country is loosely based around. That would be... okay, don't crucify me for this one. Galdhøpiggen.
Galdhøpiggen.
Sounds kinda close to me. And this here mountain stands proudly in Jotunheimen, Norway. There's even a little cabin on the top, with an elevation of 2,469 meters above sea level. It's still significantly taller than my rather generous estimate for the throat of the world when using stairs to estimate its value. This isn't even the tallest mountain in Europe, and is less than a third of the elevation of Everest and K2. So that brings another question. Can the throat of the world actually be this short? There is a reality in which the mountains of Tamriel are kinda just short. Mountains in the real world form because of movements of the tectonic plates, something that I'm not 100% sure is in the Elder Scrolls. The world of Nirn was made by gods and magic, and some of that magic exists in the throat of the world. The throat of the world is said to be where humanity was first created by Cain, who you might know as Kinnereth, and it might also be the Snow Tower, one of the towers of Nirn that stabilised the Mundus, essentially the world of Nirn, the Divine Planets and the Oblivion Planes. It's also where Alduin got booted through time, and the eternal snow at its peak has special properties, and we can see these properties with the first frosts to fall on the mountain collected in the White File quest item. Long story short, this isn't just a big mountain. Like the Red Mountain, which formed when Lorkhan's heart was shot by Auriel's bow into the sea, see this Lorkhan video for that, this mountain clearly got some extra love from the gods. Perhaps this is why the mountain itself is so short, because it was specifically made that way, and the other mountains on Tamriel were thus made to be its junior, save for the Red Mountain until it blew up. It seems like a bit of a cop-out answer, but the reality could be that Tamriel just doesn't have big mountains, and the largest in the world, on par with our Everest and K2, are on different continents. So, let's quickly have a look at that too.
Rumor has it the Nerevarine has left Morrowind on an expedition to Akavir and has not been heard from since.
To begin with, let's see how realistic it would be for a continent the size of Tamriel to have the tallest mountain as relatively small as the throat of the world, based on our real world, and based on the 7,000 step rough estimate of 2,050 meters. For that, we need to figure out the size of Tamriel, and there isn't really a solid answer for this, but I'm going with being roughly the size of Europe plus a little extra, and let me explain why. For one, the Arena Game Guide, made way back when, states that Tamriel's real size was 12 million square kilometers, which it's interesting to me that an American game is using kilometers, but either way, with Europe being around 10.2 million kilometers, if you largely ignore the behemoth that is Russia. This is somewhat confirmed by a secondary source, a Tumblr post by Lady Nerevar, who is apparently the wife of the famous, or rather infamous, Michael Kirkbride, who was known to make much of the weird lore in the Scrolls series and is basically the reason I have a YouTube channel. Here's the map from the post, and forgive me, it's not the highest quality, showing that Lady Nerevar agrees with Arena's estimation. Now, is this still the case in the big 2026 after all the changes to the lore, especially since ESO gave us most of Tamriel to explore? I'm not really sure, but it's the only real number I could find. Now, in a similar area in the real world, does the 2,050 meter rough estimate add up? Not really. While the tallest and second tallest mountains in Europe are officially in Russia, and we're ignoring Russia for this size comparison, we can still look at the third tallest, which stands in Georgia, Saqqara. Someone correct me on that one. Now, this mountain has an elevation of 5,193 meters, more than twice my estimate for the throat of the world, so we're still considerably short. If we kind of ignore Tamriel's size and just do a world tour of the tallest mountains on other earthly continents, the throat of the world continues not to impress. For instance, Africa's tallest mountain is Kilimanjaro in Tanzania. Oh, by sure, something I can finally pronounce. And this stands even taller than its European cousin at 5,895 meters above sea level. Obviously, Asia has Everest, so we don't need to talk about that much, but North America has Denali in Alaska, formerly known as Mount McKinley, standing at an elevation of 6,190 meters. South America's tallest rock mound is Aconcagua in Argentina, the tallest outside of Asia at 6,961 meters above sea level. The relatively small continent of Oceania has Puncak Jaya in New Guinea at 4,884 meters. Oh man, I'm hoping I'm getting these mountain names right. Finally, we have the home of the penguins, Antarctica, proudly presenting Mount Vinson at 4,892 meters, all of which are far taller than my estimate for the throat of the world. Well, my second one anyway. My first estimate would actually be taller than all of them, except from Asia's overachievers. So, what about other continents on Nirn? What are the chances that one of them has a taller mountain more in line with the real world big boys? Well, Yokuda flooded into the sea, so that's not happening. Everything there is literally below sea level, straight negative elevation. Atmora is practically Elder Scrolls' answer to Antarctica, and while it was once habitable, this is not the case anymore since it was frozen over. Plus, there were some godly wars there, the continent apparently shattered, and there is a chance that a lot of the tallest mountains there probably got a trim off the top. Plus, the Admorans, who were the first to come to Skyrim, probably named the mountain range, since Hrothgar sounds pretty Nord to me, and the Throat of the World. A name like Throat of the World sounds pretty tall to me, so to the Azmorans it was probably the tallest mountain they ever saw until they waddled over to Morrowind to have a gander at the Red Mountain. We had a bunch of Akaviri come over during numerous invasions, but none of them really talked about their mountains. Akavir does seem to be based on Asia, so there's a chance it also has some Himalayan-sized rock mounds standing about, but I don't really know how big it is. According to Lady Nerevar's map, it's pretty tiny, but there's so much more lore of the place because of ASO, so it could be massive like this Fanon map would suggest. Again, it's a possibility, but from what we know, the Throat of the World and its special status kind of implies it's big for Nirn standards, not just Tamriel's. The other continent on the map we need to talk about is Lig, which I'm pretty sure is just blown up. Apparently, Mehrunes Dagon blew up one of the towers of Nirn, called Kim El Gargjig, I think, in all caps for some reason. Then the entire continent sank, so, yeah, just like with Yokuda, none of that is above sea level, and we have another continent filled with nothing but negative elevation. So by default it kinda seems like the Throat of the World is one of the tallest mountains in the world, not just Tamriel, unless Akavir has something special for us. Mainly because 2 of the continents sank and 1 got smashed up a bit, then frozen over.
My own stunts. I never have a stunt double, it's always me. Tom Cruise does a similar thing, I'm the same. I always do my own stunts. 3, 2, 1, go! Greg?
So we've determined 2 things, although they can't simultaneously be true. Either A, the Throat of the World is as tall as you'd expect for a mountain that currently holds the title of the tallest in the continent, maybe even the world, but 7,000 steps to High Hrothgar simply isn't enough if the monastery is as high up the mountain as is represented in-game. Sure, High Hrothgar could be 7,000 steps up a massive mountain, but that would mean it's a 5th or the 6th of the way up to the peak of the Throat of the World, which clearly is not the case if in-game sources are anything to go by. Alternatively, B. There are 7,000 steps to High Hrothgar, and it is as relatively high as we see in-game, but the mountain is just kinda short, even in its true lore iteration. It's shorter than every real-world continent's tallest mountain. Now, as I talked about with the other continents, this could make sense, since 2 of the continents sank and the former tallest mountain in Tamriel blew up, taking a bit off the top. But even then, it feels like the tallest mountain in Tamriel should be a lot bigger than 7,000 steps plus Parthenax's little bit on top. This also, by proxy, means that every other mountain in Skyrim is pretty tiny too. Skyrim as a country is very mountainous, having mountain ranges flanking the south, the Geralt Mountains in the border with Cyrodiil, the west, the Drudak Mountains, flanking Hammerfell and High Rock, and most famously, the east border, with the Velothi Mountains bordering Morrowind, probably being the most famous example. With the Hrothgar range, that's 4 pretty meaty mountain ranges plus the odd mountain here and there, and none hold a candle to a potentially 2,000-ish meter Throat of the World. Again, this could all make sense if the Throat of the World were the 7,327.74 meter figure I mentioned before for its elevation, but again, 7,000 steps probably isn't going to cut it to get to High Hrothgar. It just feels like the scaling is pretty off, and while it doesn't really matter for gameplay because everything is scaled down, so you don't have to spend literal days, maybe even weeks, walking up a mountain, it does feel like Bethesda could have done with a geologist or a mathematician to make these figures add up. Having small mountains in a magic world like Nirn, with dragons, steampunk tech from dwarves, and whatever the hell Hermaeus Mor is, just doesn't sit right with me. Still, if you want a quick way up a mountain, no matter how high it is, you can always just ask a giant for help. You'll be flying high in no time.
The death of any Viltrumite leaves a void in me.
Thanks for watching another strange, but less British, look at the mechanical aspects of Skyrim. For those of you who like my lore videos, I hope there was enough of that in here for you to enjoy. And for those of you who are new, welcome. As odd as this was, I suppose it was a bit of a geography lesson with various mountains around the world. Maybe it will help you in a pub quiz, if people even do that anymore. There are a few viruses floating around, so who knows. Maybe Zoom quizzes with the family will be popular again and you can use this knowledge there. On a jarringly different note, I mentioned the continents outside of Tamriel and went over some lore briefly here, but if that is a video you are interested in, please do let me know. I have a long to-do list that will last me a while, but if you guys show specific interest for that, then I'll bump it up the list. In the meantime, please do the whole YouTube ritual of liking, commenting and subscribing. I really do appreciate the comments you guys make, provided you're not saying something horrifically offensive, and hopefully I'll see you in another video later down the line.
The wolf bore its fangs and spread its claws and tore at its own hide. Drink the blood and become my sons, or by dawn you'll never survive. And so the pack was born again as the Wolves of Jorrvaskr, to rule in life and serve in death as the moonlight's bound hunter. And so the pack was born again as the Wolves of Jorrvaskr, to rule in life and serve in death as the moonlight's dark hunter.